They say the dead cannot speak. They say that once a voice is silenced by the grave, its frequency fades into the static of history. They are wrong. There are voices that do not fade. They merely wait. They wait for the soil to be ready, for the air to be thick enough to carry their weight again. They wait for a vessel. For 100 years, the world has tried to bury the words of Marcus Mosiah Garvey. They buried him in headlines of ridicule. They buried him in prison cells. They buried him under the heavy concrete of geopolitical amnesia. But a prophecy is not a physical thing. You cannot handcuff a vision. You cannot deport a dream. Garvey spoke of a day when Africa would not just ask for a seat at the table, but would build its own house. He spoke of a leadership that was not trained in the polite academies of the West, but forged in the fire of absolute necessity. He described a figure, a shape in the mist of the future, who would not bargain for freedom, but would simply take it, because it was already his. For decades, we looked for this figure in presidents who wore expensive suits and spoke perfect French. We looked for him in grand summits in Geneva and New York. We looked, and we saw nothing but shadows. The diaries of history seemed to have skipped a page. But what if we were looking in the wrong direction? What if the man Garvey saw was not standing on a red carpet, but sitting in the dust of a military camp? What if the prophecy was not written in ink, but in the calloused hands of a soldier? Do not look away. What comes next may change how we read the map of our own time. If you believe that history is not just a record of the past, but a blueprint for the future, then you are in the right place. Give us your like, leave your thoughts, and subscribe to continue this journey together. This is not for us. It is to keep the flame of dignity burning. Let us go back to the source. When Marcus Garvey looked at the map of Africa in the 1920s, he did not see a continent of victims. He saw a sleeping giant. He famously said, "Up, you mighty race, accomplish what you will." But inherent in that command was a warning. Garvey knew that the chains of physical slavery were easy to break compared to the chains of the mind. He predicted that the true liberation of Africa would only come when a leader emerged who feared no one but God and his own conscience. A leader who could look at the empires of the world, at their banks, their armies, their treaties, and see them not as masters, but as temporary obstacles. Scholars have long argued over the specifics of Garvey's writings. Some say his whirlwind speech was poetic license. Others insist it was a literal forecast of a storm that would sweep across the Sahel. But recently, a new chapter has been added to this debate. It is not found in a museum archive or a dusty library. It is being written live, on television screens and social media feeds. It is being written in Ouagadougou. In September 2022, the world witnessed something that defied the logic of modern politics. A young captain, Ibrahim Traoré, stepped into the vacuum of power. He did not come with a manifesto drafted by foreign consultants. He did not come with the blessing of the Élysée Palace. He came with a beret, a fatigues uniform, and a look in his eyes that unsettled the comfortable diplomats of the international community. Watch him closely. There is a specific energy, a specific vibration that surrounds him. It is what many observers are now calling the Ibrahim Traore moment. This is not just about a coup. Coups happen in Africa with tragic frequency. This was different. This was not a grab for power. It was a grab for dignity. When Traoré speaks, he does not use the diplomatic code that softens the blow of truth. He speaks with the raw, unpolished clarity of a man who knows he is running out of time. Garvey wrote about the Black Moses. He described a leader who would unify the people not through coercion, but through shared identity. Look at the crowds in Burkina Faso today. They are not being paid to wave flags. They are not being coerced to chant slogans. They are awake. For the first time in generations, the youth of the Sahel are seeing a reflection of themselves in their leader. They see a man who eats what they eat, who walks where they walk, and who refuses to apologize for his existence. This is the connection that the history books are afraid to make. The establishment wants you to believe that Traoré is an anomaly, a glitch in the system, a temporary, chaotic element that will soon be corrected. But if you overlay his actions with the template Garvey left behind, the picture aligns with terrifying precision. Garvey warned that the empire would use every tool to discredit the liberator. He warned of economic strangulation. He warned of slander. Does this sound familiar? From the moment Traoré declared that Burkina Faso's minerals belonged to its people, the machinery of the global order began to turn against him. The headlines shifted. The aid packages were threatened. The concerns for democracy were suddenly voiced by capitals that had happily supported dictators for decades. It was as if a script written in the 1920s was being acted out in 2024. But there is a detail in this unfolding drama that even the most astute analysts have missed. It is a subtle shift, a nuance in the way Traoré holds himself, in the way he addresses the former colonizers. It is not the defiance of a rebel who knows he will lose. It is the calm assurance of a man who knows the wind has changed. Garvey often spoke of the psychological moment, the precise instant when fear evaporates and is replaced by purpose. We are watching that moment play out in real time. It is in the way Traoré sits in a chair during interviews, not leaning forward to please, but leaning back to assess. It is in the way he wears his uniform, not as a costume of authority, but as a working skin. We must ask ourselves, is it possible that ideas do not die? Is it possible that a vision, once articulated with enough force, hangs in the ether until a spirit strong enough to carry it is born? The resemblance is not physical, it is spiritual. It is the architectural similarity of their backbones. Neither man was built to bow. However, the path of the prophecy is not paved with gold. It is paved with stones, and some of them are sharp enough to cut through the soles of a nation's feet. Garvey died alone, his work unfinished, his reputation tattered by the enemies he dared to challenge. He left behind a blueprint, but he also left behind a cautionary tale. He showed us that the empire does not forgive, it remembers. And when it sees a spark that reminds it of the fire that almost burned it down a century ago, it reacts with overwhelming force. Traoré stands today at the very precipice that Garvey looked over. The drop is steep, the winds are high, the sharks are circling in the waters below, waiting for a slip, a mistake, a moment of weakness. But there is one thing Garvey saw that the world ignored: a secret weapon that does not rely on gunpowder or uranium. A weapon that has been dormant for centuries, hidden in the plain sight of the African village. And right now, Ibrahim Traoré is reaching for it. The world thinks it knows what power looks like. It thinks power is a nuclear warhead or a swift banking sanction. But Garvey whispered of something else, a force capable of breaking the spine of imperialism without firing a single shot. Traoré has found it. He has unlocked the very thing the West feared most. But what is it? And why does its discovery mean that the rules of the game have changed forever? The secret weapon Garvey saw was not a hidden cache of rifles. It was not a treaty with a rival superpower. It was something far more dangerous to the established order: the total, uncompromising ownership of one's own reality. Garvey called it African fundamentalism. Today, in the dust of Ouagadougou, they simply call it sovereignty. For a century, the relationship between Africa and the West was defined by a polite fiction. The fiction was that Africa was free, but its resources were managed by others for its own good. It was a masterful illusion. The flags were different, the anthems were new, but the flow of wealth remained exactly the same: south to north. Garvey screamed against this illusion until his voice broke. He told us that political independence without economic independence is merely a longer chain. And this is where the echo of action becomes deafening. Captain Traoré did not just read history, he decided to grab it by the collar. When he expelled foreign troops, it was not a military tactic. It was a philosophical statement. When he questioned why a country rich in gold sits in darkness while its wealth lights up the boulevards of Europe, he was channeling the very essence of the 1920s Harlem debates. But unlike the thinkers of the past, he had the power to sign the decree. The world watched in stunned silence as the contracts were torn up. The mining codes were revised. The tax treaties, written decades ago to favor foreign capitals, were thrown into the shredder. This is the difference between a politician and a historical inevitability. A politician calculates the cost of offending a donor. A historical inevitability does not care. Let us take a moment here, not to rush forward, but to give thanks. Write a comment with a simple thank you to Traoré, to Burkina Faso, or to the spirit of sovereignty itself. Gratitude is not a formality. It is recognition. It is dignity expressed in words. When you add your voice of thanks, you are not just engaging with a video. You're standing in solidarity with a story of freedom and pride. So before we continue, take this pause to comment your thank you. Together, those words become a beacon that shines far beyond the screen. Now look at the reaction. When a leader disrupts the flow of cheap resources, the international system does not applaud. It recoils. We saw the immediate branding of Traoré as radical, anti-Western, and dangerous. But notice the Ibrahim Traoré reaction to these labels. It was not anger. It was not a desperate attempt to explain himself to CNN or the BBC. It was a shrug. There is a moment that perfectly captures this shift. During a high-level diplomatic exchange, when pressed about the concerns of the international community, Traoré's demeanor did not crack. He did not seek validation. In that silence, in that refusal to play the role of the scolded child, the ghost of Marcus Garvey was smiling. Garvey famously said, "If you have no confidence in self, you are twice defeated in the race of life." Traoré's reaction was the physical manifestation of supreme self-confidence. He looked at the cameras and essentially said, "Your definitions no longer apply here. This is why the youth are marching. They are not marching for a man. They are marching for the end of an era of humiliation. They see a leader who has stopped asking for permission to breathe. But we must dig deeper. The echo is not just in attitude. It is in the soil itself. Garvey preached self-reliance, the idea that a people must feed themselves, clothe themselves, and defend themselves. Look at the initiatives launched in the last 18 months. The Community Entrepreneurship Program, the push for agricultural sufficiency, the call for citizens to contribute to the war effort not just with taxes, but with their own hands. This is the do-for-self philosophy brought to life. It is the rejection of the aid trap. For decades, Aid was the anesthetic that kept the patient asleep while the surgery was performed on his wallet. Traoré stopped the anesthetic. The pain of waking up is real. Inflation is biting. Security is a daily battle. But the patient is finally awake. The West calls this isolation. Traoré calls it sanitization. He is sanitizing the country from the dependency that has crippled it since 1960. It is a brutal process. It requires sacrifice. But for the first time, the sacrifice is not being made to pay off interest on a loan to the IMF. It is being made to build a foundation that future generations can stand on. Consider the Volunteers for the Defense of the Homeland, VDP. To the cynical eye of a foreign analyst, an arming civilians sounds like chaos. But through the lens of Garveyism, it is the ultimate expression of responsibility. It says, "This land is ours, so the burden of protecting it is ours." It is a terrifying concept to those who want to maintain a monopoly on violence, but it is a liberating concept to those who have felt helpless for too long. Yet here lies the great paradox. The more successful Traoré becomes in asserting this sovereignty, the more dangerous his position becomes. History teaches us that the empire does not fear a failed state. It feeds on them. Chaos allows for intervention. Poverty allows for charity. What the empire fears, what it has always feared since the days of Haiti's revolution, is a functional, defiant, self-sufficient black state. Garvey was destroyed not because he failed, but because he was succeeding. Like his shipping line, his factories, his newspaper, they were dismantling the myth of black incompetence. Traoré is doing the same on a national scale. He is proving that an African nation can walk away from its masters and not immediately collapse. In fact, it might even start to run. This proof is dangerous. If Burkina Faso succeeds, who is next? Mali? Niger? The contagion of dignity is hard to contain once it breaches the border. The pressure is mounting. We see it in the subtle economic squeezes. We hear it in the whispers of instability, propagated by intelligence agencies. They are waiting for the economy to buckle. They are waiting for the people to grow tired of eating dignity instead of imported rice. They are betting on the fragility of human hope. But they have forgotten the second part of Garvey's lesson. He did not just teach defiance, he taught endurance. He taught that the path to freedom is a marathon run through a minefield. Traoré seems to understand this. He is not promising a paradise tomorrow. He is promising a struggle today so that paradise becomes a possibility for the grandchildren. The question is no longer, did Garvey see him? The question is, can he survive what Garvey saw coming? Because the reaction is not over. The initial shock of the West has worn off, and now the cold, hard calculations of geopolitics are taking over. Plans are being drawn up in quiet rooms. Alliances are being tested. The Ibrahim Traoré reaction to the first wave of pressure was stoic. But the second wave? The second wave will not be a wave of words. It will be a wave of consequences. He has defied the banks. He has defied the armies. He has defied the very timeline of post-colonial history. And now, the bill is coming due. They thought economic pressure would break him. They thought isolation would make him beg for a return to the old ways. They were wrong. But in their miscalculation, they have been forced to change tactics. The diplomatic gloves are coming off, and a new, far more sinister ultimatum is being prepared. Traoré is about to face a choice that will determine whether Burkina Faso rises as a beacon or burns as a warning. The trap has been set. To understand the gravity of this moment, we must understand the nature of the enemy. When Marcus Garvey spoke of the empire, he was not just talking about men in pith helmets occupying government buildings. He was talking about a system, a vast, interconnected web of finance, media, and diplomacy designed to ensure that the balance of power never shifts. For 60 years, this system has operated in the shadows of the Sahel. But now, forced into the light by Traoré's defiance, it has revealed its teeth. The response was not subtle. It began with the weaponization of fear. Almost immediately after the expulsion of foreign troops, the narrative machine began to spin. International reports suddenly painted Burkina Faso not as a nation fighting for its life, but as a rogue state drifting into chaos. We saw the suspension of aid, money meant for hospitals and schools used as a leash to choke the new government. We saw the diplomatic isolation, the cold shoulders at summits, the ominous warnings issued by foreign embassies urging their citizens to leave. This is the price of defiance. It is the tax levied on any nation that dares to suggest its future belongs to itself. But the most dangerous threat was not external. It was internal. Garvey warned that the greatest danger to the movement would come from the traitor within the gates. History confirms this. From Patrice Lumumba to Thomas Sankara, the fatal blow is rarely struck by a foreign hand. It is struck by a brother whose ambition has been bought. In Ouagadougou, the whispers of coup plots began to circulate. Shadowy meetings were held in neighboring capitals. Intelligence reports intercepted communications suggesting that plans were being made to restore order, a polite euphemism for removing Traoré by any means necessary. Yet here is where the script broke. In the past, a few phone calls from Paris or Washington would have been enough to trigger a regime change. A few generals would be promised villas in Europe, and the tanks would roll. But this time, when the rumors of a counter-coup spread, the tanks did not roll. The people did. Thousands of Burkinabe citizens poured into the streets, surrounding the presidency, surrounding the public broadcasting station. They did not wait for orders. They set up watches, sleeping on the pavement, turning their bodies into a living wall around their leader. This was the Garveyite dream made flesh, a people so united in their vision that they became ungovernable by foreign proxies. Before we reveal the next chapter, which is perhaps the most powerful assertion of sovereignty you will ever hear, I want to pause and speak directly to you. If this channel has moved you, if these stories are touching something deep in your spirit, then consider becoming a member. Not for exclusive content or perks, but because supporting this channel is directly supporting narratives that mainstream media refuses to tell. Every membership is a vote for the African Changes mission. Every member becomes a co-creator of the revolution we are documenting. Join us. Stand with the principle that African wealth belongs to Africa. The resilience of the Burkinabe people forces us to confront a deeper reality. Why are they willing to risk so much? Why endure the sanctions, the inflation, the uncertainty? The answer lies in what Garvey called mental slavery. For decades, the African mind was bombarded with the message that it was incapable of democracy, incapable of industry, but incapable of logic. This psychological conditioning is harder to break than any physical chain. It convinces the victim that the master is necessary for survival. Traoré has shattered this illusion. By looking the West in the eye and saying no, he has proven that the master is not necessary. In fact, the master is obsolete. This realization is liberating, but it is also terrifying. It means there is no one else to blame. If the road is hard, it is because we are building it. If the harvest is thin, it is because we must plant more. This is the burden of adulthood that Burkina Faso has accepted. We see this shift in the Ibrahim Traore reaction to the security crisis. Instead of relying on foreign peacekeepers, who often stood by while villages burned, he turned to the volunteers for the defense of the homeland, VDP. He asked farmers, to teachers, and shopkeepers to take up the defense of their own soil. Critics called it a desperate gamble. They said civilians could not fight terrorists, but they missed the point. A foreign soldier fights for a paycheck. A volunteer fights for his mother's house. The motivation is different. The frequency is different. And slowly, painfully, the tide began to turn. Villages were retaken, schools reopened. The national flag was raised in places where it had not been seen for years. It was not a total victory. The war is far from over, but it was a victory of spirit. It proved that the solution to Africa's problems does not arrive on a plane from Brussels. It rises from the dust of the village square. However, the empire is not known for its patience. As the soft pressure of sanctions failed to break the government, the hard options began to appear on the table. The rhetoric from the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, hardened. Threats of military intervention were floated, Africans being pushed to fight Africans to protect interests that were not African. It was a trap. A classic geopolitical snare designed to drag the Sahel into a fratricidal war that would burn the region to the ground, leaving the resources free for the taking. Traoré saw the trap. He knew that Burkina Faso could not stand alone against such a coalition. The odds were mathematically impossible. A landlocked nation, sanctioned, surrounded, and outgunned. By all conventional logic, the checkmate was inevitable. This is the moment where most leaders would fold. This is the moment where the phone call is made, the deal is cut, and the revolution quietly dies in a boardroom in exchange for amnesty. But Traoré did not make that call. Instead, he looked at the map of West Africa and saw what Garvey saw a century ago. He saw that the artificial borders drawn by colonizers were just lines in the sand. He saw that his neighbors, Mali and Niger, were facing the same gun, held by the same hand. He realized that the only way to survive the price of defiance was to raise the stakes. If the world wanted to isolate them, they would not hide. They would combine. He reached out to Bamako and Niamey, not for a photo opportunity, but for a pact of blood. He proposed something that had been forbidden since independence, a true military and political confederation that would erase the colonial borders in everything but name. The diplomats in the West laughed. They said it was impossible. They said 3 poor, besieged nations could not form a power bloc. They called it a coalition of the desperate. They did not understand that desperation, when disciplined by vision, becomes the most powerful fuel on earth. Traoré was no longer just fighting for Burkina Faso. He was fighting for the survival of an idea. The pressure cooker was screaming. The ultimatum from the regional bloc was clear. Return to the constitutional order, the old order, or face all necessary measures. The deadline was set. The clock began to tick. The world held its breath, waiting for the young captain to blink. He stood at the podium, the weight of millions of lives on his shoulders. The cameras flashed. The silence was absolute. He had to choose, submit and save his own life, or cross a line from which there is no return. The ultimatum was designed to crush him. It was a choice between suicide and surrender. But Traoré did not choose either. In a move that stunned military strategists and historians alike, He did not just reject the threat, he expanded the battlefield. He uttered a sentence that dissolved the old alliances instantly and created a new geopolitical reality in the heart of Africa. The West thought they had him cornered. They didn't realize they were locked in the room with him. He did not flinch. When the deadline arrived, when the threats of intervention reached their fever pitch, Captain Traoré did not retreat into a bunker. He stepped forward into a handshake. Alongside the leaders of Mali and Niger, he signed the Liptako Gourma Charter, birthing the Alliance of Sahel States, AES. It was a masterstroke of geopolitical judo. By legally binding the three nations together, he transformed a vulnerable trio of isolated states into a single, fortified bloc. He effectively told the world, "If you want to touch one of us, you must fight all of us." This was the impossible move that the intelligence agencies had failed to predict. They were looking for signs of surrender. Instead, they witnessed the birth of a new regional superpower. This was the specific Ibrahim Traore moment that shifted the axis of West African history. It was no longer about a single captain holding the line. It was about the erasure of the colonial borders that had divided these brothers for over a century. Garvey's ghost was present in that room. The Pan-Africanism he preached was often dismissed as a romantic dream, a utopia that could never survive the harsh realities of tribalism and politics. But here, under the most extreme pressure imaginable, the dream was becoming structure. It was becoming law. Now let us turn this story into a shared moment. Write in the comments where you are watching from, your city, your country, your corner of the world. The African Change will read them with gratitude, and we send to each of you a heartfelt wish. May your journey be filled with dignity, hope, and light. This is more than a video. It is a gathering of voices across the globe. Whether you are in Accra, London, New York, or a village whose name deserves to be spoken aloud, let the comments below become a map of connection, showing that this message reaches far beyond borders. The creation of the Alliance of Sahel States is not just a military pact. It is a declaration of independence for the 21st century. It proposes a future where African resources power African development, where a gold refinery in Bamako or a textile factory in Ouagadougou serves the local market first. The West watched with bated breath. They expected panic. But the Ibrahim Traore reaction to the formation of this alliance was one of quiet, steely resolve. There were no victory parades, no premature celebrations, just the immediate grinding work of integration. This sobriety is what sets this era apart. In the past, African revolutions were often consumed by their own heat, fiery speeches followed by administrative collapse. Traoré seems to understand that the speech is the easy part. The hard part is the logistics of freedom. It is ensuring the electricity runs, the soldiers are fed, and the corruption is rooted out. But we must be honest about the horizon. The formation of the AES does not mean the danger has passed. If anything, the danger has evolved. The empire does not give up its jewels easily. We will likely see more subtle forms of destabilization, currency warfare, cyber attacks, the funding of proxy insurgencies. The road ahead is not paved. It is a dirt track through a storm. Yet something fundamental has broken. The fear is gone. When you speak to the young people in the streets of Ouagadougou today, you do not hear the despair that defined the previous decade. You hear a fierce, protective pride. They know the odds are stacked against them. They know they might go hungry. But they also know that for the first time in their lives, they are the authors of their own story. This is the ultimate vindication of Marcus Garvey. He did not promise that freedom would be comfortable. He promised that it would be yours. We return, finally, to the question that started this journey. Did Marcus Garvey see him? Perhaps he did not see the face of a young captain in a red beret. Perhaps he did not know the name Burkina Faso, which did not even exist in his time. But he saw the spirit. He saw the inevitable arrival of a generation that would look at the chains of the past, both mental and physical, and simply decide to drop them. Traoré is not a messiah. We must be careful not to make the mistake of idolizing the man, for men are fallible. Men can stumble. Men can be broken. Traoré is, instead, a vessel. He is a conduit for a historical force that has been building pressure for 400 years. If he were to fall tomorrow, the movement would not die. That is his greatest achievement. He has not built a cult of personality. He has awakened a collective consciousness. The genie of sovereignty is out of the bottle, and no amount of foreign aid or military intervention can put it back in. This is the second Ibrahim Traoré moment that defines our time. The realization that the leader is just the spark, but the people are the fuel. The diaries of history are being rewritten, not by the victors of the past, but by the survivors of the present. The lost diaries of Garvey are no longer lost. They are being lived. Every factory built, every terrorist repelled, every unfair treaty cancelled is a page being restored to the book of African dignity. As we close this chapter, let us pause. What you have just heard is not simply an episode of history. It is a reminder that sovereignty, dignity, and hope are still alive, waiting to be claimed. If this message has moved you, then subscribe to this channel. Not because we ask for numbers, but because we are building a space where voices of independence are honored, and where stories of pride continue to be told. By subscribing, you are not just supporting us. You are choosing to walk with us into the next chapter of Africa's unfolding story. Do not let this moment pass into silence. Subscribe and stand ready for the chapter that comes after this one. The sun is setting on the old order. The shadows are long, and the air is cooling. But in the twilight, we can see the silhouette of a new structure rising against the sky. It is rough, it is unfinished, and it is under siege, but it is standing. Garvey saw the foundation. Traoré is laying the bricks, but the question remains, hanging in the silence after the speech ends and the cameras turn off. It is not a question for the politicians or the soldiers. It is a question for us, the witnesses. Garvey saw the leader. Traoré answered the call. But as the weight of the future settles onto the shoulders of the Sahel, we must ask, are we just spectators watching a tragedy, or are we the soil in which this seed must finally survive?